Carrie, can you let me know who we've got on the?
Kevin Hansen currently.
Okay, welcome, Kevin. Welcome everyone else around the table. Thank you for making the trip up here. I greatly appreciate it. I love to see these kinds of turnouts here, especially in the winter.
It's not supposed to snow tonight. I checked.
Positive thinking, right? Positive thinking. So why don't we get things rolling here, and we'll get going. The first item on the agenda is we've got Mike Mcgrath this evening to talk about proficiency-based learning.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, for having me. I really appreciate the work that you do. I know that it's not always the easiest thing to spend time like this on a weeknight, putting in hours. It's super important work, and I'm just grateful. I'm originally from the Midwest, and those of you who've heard me speak before, I usually mention that. So that I've been in Vermont for 11 years, and this is one of my favorite things about Vermont. Town meeting day and all of the effort that the citizens of Vermont put into their state, I think, is unique and something that I'm grateful for, so thank you. As Neil said, my name is Mike Mcgrath. I currently am the Assistant Executive Director for the Vermont Principals Association, which is a new role for the VPA. And it's rolled together a few different things. And previous to this role, I worked as a guidance counselor in the Franklin Northeast District at Enosburg High School. I was the middle school principal in Enosburg, and I was the high school principal in Montpelier. So if Michelle, she and I know each other quite well, Michelle Braun. And this job opened up, and I'm new to that. Why am I the person who might be speaking to you about proficiency? Well, I feel like I've been talking about proficiency for about 5 years straight. I've definitely been talking about it all day. And most recently, just this afternoon, I provided some testimony to the state education committee, the Senate Ed. And so I do feel like I am sort of on the cutting edge of the conversation, both statewide and on the local level. Montpelier High School implemented proficiency-based learning in full 4 years ago. So 4 years ago was a real hot topic in our local community. And since then, it's really sort of faded into the background as we had other things to engage in, other problems to solve. Overall, while not perfect, that implementation is considered not only by myself, but I think by our community, and I think Michelle will back me up with it if she comes, to have gone relatively smoothly. Montpelier High School was identified by MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, as a feature school for proficiency-based learning. Sometimes it's called competency-based learning in the country, or standards-based learning. And they came and did some short films, talking to students, talking to myself, talking to our teachers, and then featured that in a worldwide MOOC. Thousands and thousands of people all over the world saw those videos as they were working to understand that work in their area. And I think maybe most salient to sort of like why I would be this person is we had, I don't remember, I guess in my slide here, I've got 21 school visits on this topic to Montpelier High School. Most of those are from Vermont, but also from outside of Vermont. So I interfaced with a lot of school administrators in that way, and teacher leaders, and also was running a Castleton course that this was one of the big topics. And so I heard from a lot of systems over the last few years, and then I've also consulted around the state a few times, including Virgins, Windham County, the Northeast Kingdom some, and Chittenden County mostly. So that's me. I think this is not working. Okay, not. Hit the next one.
Oops, next slide.
Okay, so one of the main things with proficiency-based learning is that, actually this is the core. If you forget everything else I say, and it washes over you, this is the core of it. Proficiency-based learning at its most basic level is about a guaranteed viable curriculum. There's nothing controversial about that. We should know what's in our curriculum. We should be able to walk into any classroom and say, what are you working on today? And ideally, that learning target for the class is on the board. And it says something along the lines of, being able to identify polynomials or something like that, right? And that's at the classroom level. Then we want to be able to do that at the course level. We want to be able to have 8 or 5 to 8, maybe 10 skills and content-related skills in a course that are identified. And really, you can put those in the course syllabus. You can put those in a program of studies, so that when students are going through their high school course catalog, it says English 9, and it also says here are the main things we're going to be working on. That is really the core. That's what it is. Guaranteed viable curriculum. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Mike.
And the second part of that is answering the question, how will we know if students, that answers what students will learn. The second part of that is how will we know they've learned. And although there are many, many things, and where I'm going to get into this, like how do we get into sort of these scraps and controversy about reporting learning, what almost everyone agrees on is that we should be clear about how we're going to assess students. And there's an effort to do that as well. So when I was in high school, I went into 9th grade science. I had no idea how we were going to be assessed. I didn't know if the quizzes were going to count as 10%. I didn't know if I brought in extra credit, if I was able to answer this question about who won the Super Bowl, if that would give me extra points on my test. We didn't really know, and I don't think anyone asked, right? It was like that was just for kids to figure out, and you figure it out with Mr. Anderson, like what's in that class. And so we are sort of taking the curtain back and thinking about what it means to assess and how assessment is meant to spur more learning, right? And to show as a measure of how kids are doing. So there's been part of that is proficiency-based assessment. So you can see our learning outcomes for today, for this evening, are for you to have an improved knowledge about what proficiency-based learning is, and what the important shifts are, and what the post-secondary institution's reaction has been, since that's been a hot topic. Are there any questions before I go any further? Okay. I'm going to pass around.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry. Does the state have or does the legislation include a timeline? Like by this date, proficiency-based learning will be implemented for everyone?
Yeah, great question. Again, I want to offer that proficiency-based learning does not solve all of our ills.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us the potential to do more with some of the other things that we know are important. And I'm going to walk you through the history a little bit, but the short answer to that is the class of 2020 did have, it was highlighted, right, as that's when our students will have a proficiency-based graduation. That's when we will have a proficiency-based transcript, and we will have fully implemented proficiency-based learning. Now, that has been absolutely variable across the state. Some places have been at a version of this for 15 years, right? And so we're able to meet that as a destination with relative comfort. Other places, because of mergers, Act 46, all the complications that are happening in schools and in local districts. They've really only begun this in all sincerity in the last year or two. Sometimes, in some places, even less than that. So the 2020 deadline has stirred up some of the concern. But I think Secretary French said something along the lines of, like, if you don't meet this deadline, what? Right?
Yeah. We're not going to reduce our funds.
Right. I think it's probably it would show up in an education quality review as something for the school to work on. Do you mind hitting the next slide?
No.
If I turn this on and off, come back. So I want to give you a little taste of what's happening around Vermont, and I'm just going to walk you briefly through. Sorry. Oh, now it's going through the history. I guess the reason for this slide is to illustrate that it's not coming out of nowhere. That this isn't sort of a newfangled idea. It might be new. There might be new words. There might be new elements of it, but it has deep roots. And I think you can draw those roots all the way back to John Dewey. And in the 1960s, there was the emphasis on that we should really focus on the learning. What are the outcomes, and not just what are the inputs. We're seeing this again, right? In the 70s, there were the, oh shoot, I forgot. I gotta zoom in here. Does anyone remember? The 70s, what they called it? Okay. Oh, I can't pull it up. Can you see that, Carrie?
Basic competency?
Yes, basic competencies. Does anybody remember those? So this was a really, I've been told, that this was a very specific guaranteed viable curriculum that was really sort of down into the nuances of what second grade might be like. And so a lot of Vermonters can remember having to count change back. Does anyone remember that? Yeah, so that it would be similar along the lines of having identified goals in a classroom, identified benchmarks that, part of being in second grade means you can X, right? And then in 2000, there were the vital results, which were part of the Vermont's framework of standards. And this was something that would be reflective in most states, but was more Vermont-centric. And from what I've learned about this, was a very thick binder of very edu jargon heavy standards that wasn't necessarily really felt in the classroom level or in the unit design level as much as it could have been, and I'm sure it was in some places and not in others. In 2010, all of states but 2, I think, adopted the Common Core as their framework of standards. And Vermont is amongst those, not necessarily in 2010, but shortly thereafter. And the proficiencies that we're talking about are all rooted in those types of national or international standards. So the math standards that are in Algebra 2 come from Common Core. Whether you're at Virgins or Montpelier or CVU or all the places you represent. Those are coming out of Common Core math standards. They're coming out of English LEA standards. And like folks like the art teachers, they actually have revised national standards that they can lean into to have identified proficiencies for our non-core for our electives, sometimes they're called. Right? So I just want to give you a sense of the history. Let's see. I did have the power there once. Let me try again. Nope.
Ooh, you did it. I didn't do it. Yeah.
Okay. So this agenda for a world-class education is actually coming from this group and the Vermont Superintendents Association. Was anyone a part of this group around like 2011, 2012?
Wow.
Yeah.
When this was launched,
Yeah.
I think the work had happened literally as I was coming on the board.
Great. So this was a
I was thinking you mentioned.
Right, Then when there was a kind of a revision, or it was looked at again.
Yeah. In 2016.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is my understanding of it again. So there may be folks in the room that know more about this than I do. But my understanding of it is that superintendents, in conjunction with the Vermont School Boards Association, did some really good work about, what do we want as an agenda? Can we do some long-term planning? And they did this, I think it's about a 25-pager. It's got some graphics that had some goals for the state of Vermont in order to have a world-class education. Technology was one of them, and one of them was essentially having identified proficiencies in schools. A lot of that work ended up in educational quality standards, And some of them ended up in statute because some of them, the goal was to have statute. Act 77, sometimes known as the Flexible Pathways Law, is the clearest example of something that went from the agenda for a world-class education to statute in 2013. Okay, I think I've got that detailed a little bit on the next slide. To our visual learners. So these are the types of things that were in there that are relevant to our conversation here this evening. Assuring success for every student, and a lot of that was about proficiency. Supporting a new vision for teaching and learning, engaging and supporting families and communities, delivering and using world-class technology, providing effective leadership. These are the big 5 points of the agenda. So you can see the connections to proficiency, pre-K, flexible pathways, all of which are underway. I think I'm going to hit it a couple more times there. We're going to get a little graphic. Gotta stand over there. So now I can click it.
Yeah, sure.
Would that be better for people? You're all very generous. Just tell me. Whatever works for you. Okay.
Rather sit or stand. We don't care.
Carrie, what do
You
you?
go all the way through this one?
Yeah.
Well,
So you can see, yeah, that's good. So you can see Act 166, which is the pre-K, Act 77, Flexible Pathways, and EQS, which falls under the State Board of Education, adopting the new educational quality standards in 2014, all in some way being driven by the agenda for a world-class education. Good work. In 2015, so Act 77 is passed, there's new EQS. Now there's this question about, how is the field going to come up to speed on this? What kind of professional learning are we going to do in the field? And in partnership with the Agency of Education, they hired the Great Schools Partnership in 2015. 40%, that's a key number, right? 40% of school districts attended these, which means more than half didn't. So 40% of our districts had this with a little bit of a running start. There's a lot of collaboration. You can see that is some Montpelier folks, including Adam Bunting, who's now the principal at CVU. And that's me with far less gray hair and a hooded sweatshirt when I worked for Franklin Northeast there as well. And so this group of people, and you can sort of track the districts that were there having more comfortable rollouts than folks that weren't, either because they have different people or because they just weren't able to attend these because only 40% of our school districts did. So this was the primary professional learning. The following year, 2016, this was the spring of 2015. The following fall and every year since, there's been no comprehensive professional development in the area of proficiency-based learning. There's been a lot of offerings from the agency. There's been a lot of ad hoc work around the state, but this was the last of the comprehensive rollout.
Is there a particular reason for that?
I think Act 46.
Kind of trumped everything?
Yeah, honestly,
Yeah, sure.
that's my unvarnished opinion.
next slide.
Yeah.
Money, money, money.
So this is just a spectrum of implementation. There's a couple more clicks there to get the years up there. And my point here is that you've got systems that have been at this for over a decade. You've got a bunch that are sort of in this 4 to 5 year range, and then you've got some systems that are in the 1 to 2 year range. One more. This slide is just something that I put together. Again, it's just sort of to illustrate the variance, right? So we have systems that maybe are far along on some aspects of it and not on others. So I mentioned that on some measures, Montpelier has had a successful rollout and would be far along in some of these things, but other things they aren't. And the reverse might be true in other systems. where, maybe they've had, 25 years of having a great work-based learning program. And so they were able to hit the ground running with Act 77 in ways that other districts just weren't. And so the point here in this slide is that it's not a either or, depending on the district. There are aspects of different districts that are more advanced than others. Some systems have great interventions, some don't, right?
Next one.
Yeah. And then you're just going to have to hit it a bunch of times. There's Vermont, and then I just sort of loaded you down with the different things. These are just if you hold it there, this is the last 5 years. And it's actually not comprehensive. These are just the big ones. MTSS is actually twice in the last 5 years. EQR is the Educational Quality Review, and you're probably familiar with many of those other initiatives. In the top right-hand corner is EQS, which I've mentioned several times. Do you have any questions about any of those?
I really would like to have this graphic for our annual meeting.
Sure. Yep. Sue has the slides.
When I first saw this, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, no wonder we're struggling.
Yeah. And if you talk to educators in the field, I think you'll hear that they feel this. And if you'll indulge me to speculate a little bit about, why, it's all good stuff. And we are the envy of other states in many ways for having a favorable policy landscape. That's what they call it, favorable policy landscape. I think it's in reaction to, wanting to do right by our young people and by our schools. And probably partly as we're recognizing a major shift in culture and in what it means to learn. I do this little trick sometimes when I present this kind of stuff where I say, does anybody know the atomic weight of cobalt? Well, nobody knows it. You never know. Maybe somebody does. It happens. And then I say, okay, I'll give you, 10 minutes to find it. Well, people find it in 12 seconds, right? Because of this. And there's a fundamental shift in schools, not only because of this, but this is a big part of it, where we're not really the holders of information. So then what are we? And it means that we have to help young people make sense of information, to give them a sense of their latitude and longitude in space and in history, right? They need to know the difference between World War II and Vietnam. That's important. They need to have certain footholds of content, and they need to be able to work through information. They need to be good consumers of information. They need to be good producers of information, right? And so there's this much more dynamic space that we're trying to evolve into for what it means to be a strong school community. I think that that's part of the reason we see so much of this stuff. Safety is fairly self-explanatory with the increase in tragedy in our schools. And there's some Vermont context there too, right? With a declining school enrollment, with Act 46 being a primary driver there. And, we could get way into that stuff. Yep.
Hi, Colleen McKinnon, Chicken Grand Isle. I would be interested in seeing something like this where there are the connections, because when I look at this, I see, well, one of them supports another, and you can't do this without that. So I think it would be really interesting for your group perhaps to take
thank you.
these acts and, MTSS and what's in between and so forth, and see and show where they connect. Because I think that's a challenge in our communities, is people don't understand how one supports the other, and something simple would be really fabulous to see.
Strong agree. Yes, thank you.
My other observation, Mark Clough from Caledonia, is that we've had 4 superintendents, and each one kind of imposes their own system on how it's going to look for the building leaders. And all of a sudden, we're involved in another system because that's what works for them. But as a layperson, it looks very confusing and like a wasted year for some kids, and the whole professional development for the educators again. And I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of statistics about being able to hold on to leadership and having that kind of stability in the system is beneficial. And that's probably a different topic for another night.
But I think I am talking about consistency of teaching mechanics.
Yes.
You know,
Right. And so as all of these things are sort of coming down and people are trying to make sense of them in their local context, and then if you add changing leadership on top of that, and they might say like, not so much this, more of that.
Yeah.
And then so for the students and the teachers, it's just kind of a blur, right? And I think that is part of what people are experiencing currently. And I agree that, showing people how they connect, and I've done that in faculty meetings, but I haven't done it in this space, so that I appreciate that. Would you mind hitting the next one? Yeah.
Kimberly says
Yeah. Hey.
again.
Yeah.
In theory, the change in leadership, if you have your guaranteed viable curriculum in place, may have less of an impact on students in theory, right?
Mhm.
Because
Yes.
you're still teaching the same content to the same standards. And the flavor of the culture may change, but the outcomes being sought for students would, in a mature system, be benefited just as hiring a new teacher would be by having those standards already set. I'm thinking if I'm playing it out through its theory.
Yes.
Okay.
And
then maybe less turnover.
yes, yes. I think that there's the possibility for more stability systematically, especially with some merging, right? And right now, it's caused a huge amount of work, right? As one school system starts to talk to the other school system, and it's like, you do what in second grade? Right? And then they have to, come to an agreement, identify, what their benchmarks are and build common assessments and agree upon what those common assessments are, and then do the calibration of those assessments. It's all good work, but it's a lot of work. And as we evolve, there will be more stability. You may remember the anecdote from the State Board of Education day that we had on January 21st, where a teacher from Peoples shared how different it is for new teachers coming into Peoples Academy this year than it would have been just 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago, if you started and you're going to teach English 10, it's just like, all right, good luck. English 10. Like, sometimes we read that book, sometimes we read that book. And now, there's these are the standards that we're going for. Here are the rubrics that we've used to measure those standards. And then, we're going to meet as a professional learning group, as English department, to talk through what we're trying to do and how we're going to calibrate that learning. And that is the kind of thing that will add stability to the systems overall. So, this has changed since I did the slide. But my point is that, there's a lot at the State House that are potentials. Sue probably knows better than I do. And just, I guess, would sort of ask, like, what does that mean? Are there some things like, again, it's sort of my opinion, literacy, which makes a lot of sense sort of under 173 or as a part of 173, which is connected to MTSS. So it's not feeling like just another thing, but a connected piece that strengthens something versus just sort of adding more things to what is already full. How are we doing? You with me? Okay. So, I'll go sort of quickly through this maybe. I think you get a feel for it, and you've been engaged in the work on some level. This is me sort of making the case for why would we bother, why PBL, and I identify 3 major things for students that are gained. And the first one, you just go ahead and skip again, is what I've already mentioned, and I think you've got a good sense of. The second one is the assessment is geared for learning growth. Again, much like you would get, like I would get, I have a kindergartner, And my kindergartner got a little bit more lengthy report card, not too long. It was front and back. And I was able to see, okay, like this is how things are going in literacy. And he had some scores, and there are parts of that. I was like, oh, we can do that. We can help with that. We're going to start working on his phonics and sounding out things. And then, his math scores were all as high as they could be. And it's like, okay, so, doing a little bit of calculation at the dinner table seems to be going well. Not, we don't have to do maybe focus more on that, but maybe we should be sounding out words a little more. So you get this sort of more specific feedback, and you're probably all used to getting that kind of feedback in reports at the lower grade levels. And really, what we're trying to do is start to do that at secondary school levels in a productive, useful way. And it has not been smooth everywhere. There's no question about that. But that's the goal, is that feedback is spurring learning, right? That students can be invited into the process when they have a rubric. Oh, this is what you're going for? Okay, now I have a sense of what I should be, of where I'm at and how I should be working towards that. And it makes room for opportunities for learning practice more than it has in the past. This is a hot button issue in many communities, and I'm going to come back to it later. And I guess the later was not much later. So so there's this idea that some students struggle to be on time, some students to turn things in, and there's a lot of reasons. Why? Maybe they have an opiate addiction, maybe they have a digital addiction, maybe things are terrible at home, right? And so schools are engaged in that work of trying to figure out what it is that's keeping the student from being engaged in class and turning in work and participating. And sometimes students just don't have great habits around studying or, unpacking their backpack in a productive way at night, and maybe they haven't had much help. And so part of what Proficiency does is try to identify the difference between, like, are you struggling with your long division? Or are you struggling with the executive functioning skills that go along with managing being a student? And we're trying to pull those apart so that we can teach them more specifically, so that we can assess them more specifically, and then so that we can report them more specifically. And it's new for schools. And so it's been handled in different ways. And I think a lot of high schools around the state are sort of landing in a spot where it has to contribute to the overall grade. Turning things in on time, doing your best work the first time around. It has to count for something, because we all need some external motivation. We all do, right? And to just sort of be like, well, it's good for you to do your homework, it hasn't really worked that well. And there was a few places where we did that for a couple of years, and some places sort of saw that coming and never went that way, and others are sort of coming around to that. The idea was not to punish kids for homework is supposed to be practice. You don't want to punish somebody who's in the process of learning, but there has to be some teeth, I think, and it seems to be playing out that way. And then there's this really big piece, and a lot of times people overlap Act 77, which is the Flexible Pathways Law, with Proficiency-Based Learning, but they're actually not the same thing. In my opinion, Proficiency-Based Learning is subservient to Act 77. Act 77 is unique to Vermont, and to me, a really exciting thing happening all over the state as school systems develop scaffolding and structures to do more anytime, anywhere learning. Whether it is work-based learning, more CTE, career and technical ed, community-based learning, internships, online learning. Schools are at different levels of learning how to do that well for kids, and the students want to do that. I'm looking at Michelle because she knows we had to hold back, even though Montpelier had a fairly evolved system. We actually couldn't keep up. We had to slow our growth for kids participating in flexible pathways of all those things and of all types of students.
We still totally cannot keep up.
Right. Right. And part of that means, when I say keep up, it means being able to keep up with having good measures of success for those kids, making sure that there's rigor in those experiences, making sure that they have teachers that have the skills to be able to support them, because it's a different thing than teaching a class in this kind of setting, right? To being able to support somebody who might be out at a barn or a work site or writing for the newspaper. It's exciting, and we're getting better at it. And proficiency-based learning supports it, because when you say, this is what's in biology, here are the 8 main things in biology, you can go get it in our biology class, and it will be lovely, and it will be great. And we want you, there's this opportunity for schools to say, if you want to get biology differently, you can. Because we have this flexible pathway built here, and there's an evolution there. We have this pathway built. We know it's in that biology, the important things. So you're going to build a plan with this teacher to be able to do biology in a different way. And I just picked on biology. You can imagine that in an English class. You can imagine it in any class. Although we find math being the most difficult to deviate from a more traditional setting. So a lot of students just sort of recognize that, and we tell them that, like, you might want to think about getting geometry in geometry class. It's not the only place, but that has been the most difficult sort of nut to crack in a flexible way. Kids do it though. Students do it. So these are the whys. Three whys. It's not always called the same thing, but Vermont is not out on a limb here. It's called competency-based learning. It's called standards-based learning in other states. And we're considered to be a little bit more evolved in the sense that we have policy connected to it, and some places don't. Rules connected to it.
So I was listening in on a presentation yesterday for House and Senate Ed and the consulting group that does this. One of the questions one of the legislators had was, in looking at Massachusetts, it's been a leader in at least what appears to be national standardized testing with their students, that they are emerging of some pause among that particular legislator in the room to better understand if they're seemingly meeting needs of students in a way that's typically at the top of the heap. Why are they just emerging in this? I was curious.
Yeah, so the measure to determine whether you're advanced, developing, or emerging is how much policy you have on the books to support proficiency or competency or standards-based learning. So it's not connected to our typical measures of success, which would be like SBAC or NAEP or AP scores, right? It's just whether or not you have evolved policy connected to it.
I think what they were suggesting is if on those other standardized scores, Massachusetts does well, and they've not, currently embraced it at a policy level, is there something to that? People are looking, right? People, I think people are seeking some causal link to outcomes for kids that can be measured in standardized ways. At least that's, I think, part of what's happening in the State House in terms of questions, and maybe elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I think there's a really good discussion there. And, anytime we're sort of folding up data, what do they say? 64% of stats are made up on the spot.
And then that's the consultant guy. The consultant guy actually said it's too early to tell.
Yeah.
The causal data doesn't exist yet, and that's apparently what they study. So,
especially when we have such a dynamic cultural landscape right now, too. It's hard to say like this is connected because of this. When on the field and talking to my colleagues, school administrators, we have never seen anything like this before with school refusal, for example. And I don't think that has to do with proficiency in any way. I think it has everything to do with digital addiction, right? And so it's like, how can you tease out? And I would offer that I think, in my opinion, Vermont is evolving its measures of success with the report card, the district report card and the school report card, having several different things that are contributing to that, not just being literacy and math scores, but school climate and culture, the way that people are spending money, and also with the educational quality review. But those things are just starting to sort of stand up. We still don't have a school climate measure in the state, though we're hopeful that we will soon, which is very desired national, to be able to measure school climate and culture in a relatively objective way. And we haven't really evolved into that, but that's connected to school safety. That's why there's such a strong interest, right? And if you ask people in the field, I mean, they're going to tell you immediately how important that is. School climate and culture as a measure of success. So I'm not sure I answered it super directly, but yeah.
Yeah, and no more or less directly than I did, yes.
Yeah. I would offer again to underscore that Vermont is evolving its new measures of success, right? And we still have NAEP, we still have SBAC scores, but those aren't the only things that we're starting to include in how we're measuring. And I also would say there might be like conversation to be had. It's like, is NAEP really keeping up with Common Core standards? You know, where the SATs have changed a lot in the last several years, right? To reflect more skills-based and less common.
Your previous slide, those white stains, that Colorado?
That was Wyoming.
Wyoming.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything?
I don't know. I have no idea. I know Kanye West recently moved
That answers
there. I'm not sure. Yeah, they're the only state that has fewer people than us, right? I think so.
Yeah.
So I got the boxing gloves on this slide. So this is what has popped up in the news. Interestingly, the news didn't pop up. Montpelier High School has many seniors get into Ivy League schools. That didn't come up, but sometimes the negative stuff can come out, and this is more interesting, maybe more newsworthy. So most of that has been around reporting, grading and reporting. So I'm just going to go over a few things. And I guess my point here in this slide, I think there's going to be a bunch of words up there. Okay. So what does the C+ mean? And then keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah. And, we could debate that. We've all worked really hard for a C+, and then we've not worked so hard on it. And then what does a 93 mean and the variance on that? This is something, that gives you more information. This is out of a proficiency-based system, right? So you get in clearer, well, maybe not clear, more information. We think that we know what a C+ means, right? We don't really have any idea what's behind that, so it seems clear to us, right? Except your version of C+ may be totally different than mine, and we definitely know that teacher's version of C+ is different than theirs. Right? We don't know what's in it. We don't know if that was super hard to achieve or not, right? And if you keep going for us, Carrie. One more. So this is meant to be confusing. My point, actually, why don't you look at it for a second? And I think the State House conversation today, I think that there's some light bulbs that went off around this, which is that we've never been consistent in the way we're reporting. And our colleges and universities have been trying to say this as much as they can. Like, look, we get transcripts from all over the world. They're all different. We get IB transcripts, which are 0 through 7, and are thinking about going to 0 through 9. We get it in different languages. We get different GPAs. And even locally in Vermont, we may have sort of thought like, Rutland does it the same as South Burlington, and does it the same as U32 5 years ago. No way, right? That just wasn't the case. We might have thought it was because we weren't really talking about it or thinking about it, just like, A through F out of 100. Not the case. Some places only used a 100-point scale, never had letter grades. Some places had honors for things and added weight to stuff. Some places didn't. Some places added weight to AP scores. Some places don't. Some places, A plus counts for more than 4 and others don't. Sometimes the GPA is out of 100. Sometimes it's out of 4. Sometimes it's out of 4.33. And so the point here is that this has never been consistent, and that it's always been okay for our post-secondary institutions. They've been able to take, as long as it's tidy, a tidy transcript and a school profile that explains how you arrived at that transcript in the school, and they run it through their way of assessing things, and they're able to find, the kinds of students that they're looking for. Any questions about any of that? This is what happens if you Google conversion chart and and IB International Baccalaureate programs. Again, they've been using a 1 through 7 scale for decades, and you're just gonna get conversion charts of all kinds.
Did you say this is just IB?
Yeah, I just Googled IB conversion chart. That's what came up. So, the strain of metaphor here is like, did we ever really look under the hood before? And I mean, I guess maybe my obvious leaning is that we didn't. And that part of the worry or the controversy or concern is just actually recognizing, like, maybe we've never really thought that deeply about how we're assessing and reporting. In a statewide conversation. I think people have done it locally, but now it's sort of like this public discussion. Yeah.
George Gonda, Rutland, getting off of the topic of reporting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think PBL will help fight grade inflation?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And we know that grade inflation is like a national trend. We also know that scores are going up for SATs nationally too. So you can say, like, oh, is the SAT getting easier? Well, it's not, right? Kids are getting better at it. And so if I were to teach an English class, let's say I taught AP English, and all my kids had straight A's in that class, we might be inclined to think, like, well, that's grade inflation. But if they then turned around and had, 4s and 5s on the AP exam, is that grade inflation or just really good teaching with great kids, right? And so I think that there's a thing to wrestle with there. Is are we inflating grades, or are we doing a better job of holding a measure of what we want kids to reach and then getting them there? And I would push for, like, I want as many of our students to be at that high achieving level as possible. I don't want things to be easy or just handed out or not rigorous. I don't want that. But I want to be able to have a rigorous measure and have as many kids meet that as possible. And I think, if we wanted to scale that up, if we thought about Finland or Singapore or places that are sort of the envy of comprehensive quality education, they want to move all of their kids up, right? They don't want to just like, we'll take the top 10%, the rest of you figure it out. I actually think that there might be more of a digression there about a change in our economy too, right? Where that might have worked if we had a lot of jobs that didn't require critical thinking or problem solving or more complex technical reading or technical writing. But it seems as though our economy needs those things, even in laborious jobs. We need strong readers. We need strong writers. And so I would make the case that, it's as important as ever to have all of our students have that bar be raised. That's not to say we're putting a cap on our high achieving students, right? And I think the flexible pathways portion of that really opens the door for all of those learners, for someone maybe inclined to get started on an internship with an electrician, like we could figure out doing that earlier. And the students who, that was a student we had who was in Bermuda flying some drone or something, just like this incredible stuff that is off the charts. There's not a cap there, right? I mean, in the sense that you could only get an A, and you could only get a 4, or you could only get an A+. That cap is the same, but I think with flexible pathways, there's more opportunity for enrichment and personalization than there was before.
I'm not saying that it's wrong, that we should not be making things easier, but we have to recognize that there is a pressure from parents and administration because of the parents to get those kids' grades up.
I think what you're raising a concern about, just like making it easier, and I'm sort of saying I don't want that. What I want is for more students to, through hard work and good support, to meet the standard at a higher level.
But I guess what I'm driving at is, would this system of grading give us more ammunition to go back and say, hey, this is what it should be?
I mean, I think it has the potential to do that because you have more stability in the system about, like, well, what do you mean by an A? What do you mean by an A? How are you determining what's a 4 and what isn't? And the more that schools do that horizontally, meaning like across grade levels, like all the 10th grade teachers talking to each other, and vertically, so 4th graders are talking to 5th grade teachers, and they can see the curriculum and they can see those measures and they can see those rubrics, then there's the potential to say, you know what, Johnny's a super nice kid. We all love Johnny. He's actually not meeting the standard, right? And therefore, when it's not just a kind of, we love you, a B+, A-, right? Because there's more data and there's more structure to be able to say, we do love Johnny and we want to support him because he's actually not reading very well right now.
And the different pathways, I guess, might mate with his strengths and
It
give
could
him a way
be.
to get
It could be. I mean, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that he is reading well. And there may be opportunities for him to engage in his education in authentic ways, other than just sitting and getting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mike, you really make me think about two policy issues that at some point we'll need to deal with. One is really requiring the professional development that teachers need. I think new teachers coming into the field, they're going through programs where this type of training, they're used to being graded themselves with these kinds of proficiency-based scoring rubrics. So they can bring that into their teaching. But people who've been in the field for a long time, maybe the most amazing teachers in the world, but a lot of this is new, and we want to value both, and it has to be done in the same place. So it seems to me that embedded professional development is incredibly critical to moving forward. And then the other piece that you raised for me with your anecdote about the kid in Bermuda flying kites or whatever the kid's doing.
Drones.
Yeah, drones. Access and equity issues really come into play, and what kind of policies do we need to ensure that all kids have access to these amazing kinds of opportunities?
Yeah.
And I don't think, I certainly don't have answers to either one of those, but I think those 2 points are really helped me think about that a little more.
It's a very rich discussion around Act 77 and access, because there's some geographical things, right? If you live in Montpelier, you can walk places. If you live in Burlington, you can walk places. If you're up in Enosburg, you can walk to the gas station or the subway. I mean, I don't mean like a subway, but like the store. And that's about it. And now, I think that there are rich work-based learning opportunities in Enosburg. I know there are, right? I've been there. But it's different, and it's a really poignant question that practitioners and the agency have wrestled with. When Rebecca Holcomb was the Secretary of Education, she released a couple of guiding documents around access, just sort of putting up that warning sign too, right? That if you're going to have community-based learning, and it might mean needing some guidance, right? To get kids there. to make sure that they have access. It's not just the kids with a license and a car that can go to those places. And it's difficult, but it's really good work, I think, and a good question to ask. I know we're at the end of our time. Most of what I have left here is just kind of reassuring folks about post-secondary things. So you can just skip through this stuff, and maybe the slides will be available to you. There's a point here about all of our state universities and Middlebury have come out and said this is not a problem for us, and you've probably heard Moses on the radio and all those things just saying like, we can figure this out, we're okay. And then they have official letters here from all the different schools, and including those big name schools that sometimes people are concerned about. So this is all those letters saying we're okay.
Just curious, do you have an example of what those schools actually received?
Like a transcript?
What do we send off to
Sure.
all those schools?
And really, this has been the flashpoint most lately. But it's slightly different, though. I think we're sort of coming into some commonality, which is what I would call like somewhat of a hybrid, at least for the time being, where students have like some proficiency scores, and then maybe a conversion to a letter grade, or maybe a conversion to a traditional GPA is represented there somewhere. Maybe not, but many schools are landing there. And then also representing those transferable skills in some way, I think is important. And so that's essentially what people are seeing, and there's several versions of that out there. And then I think, this is my speculation, that we're actually going to evolve past that, because transcripts are 100% digital. They're sent digitally. We don't mail them anymore. They get emailed to universities. And you're going to be able to do a lot more with the transcript because it's going to be a dynamic link. And so I think we're going to evolve in the next few years where there will be like, these are the courses that I took, these are the proficiencies I met, these are my grades of some kind. They kind of be a 1 or 2 pager. And then I think that we're going to evolve into some kind of video or portfolio that is also available. And this is getting a little ahead of myself, but I think it's possible that kids are going to be able to have more ability to personalize their transcript than they have in the past, where they're going to be able to go in and say, you know what, I want to have this narrative as the top of mine, and I want to have my grades here, and they're just going to be able to like live move them around. I think that's probably where we're evolving into.
I just want to make a comment essentially, and I think this isn't going to come as a surprise to you. I'm sure you're already aware of it, but I'm just looking around the room. The communities that the various school board members represent here are so disparate in so many ways that, not only in terms of how these are implemented, but the timeline in which they get implemented is just going to be crucial. And I think that the school board members look at it slightly differently than principals.
Yeah, sure.
So I just want to point that out because we still consider ourselves, at least I do, to be the elected representative of the community.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I just want to make that as a statement pretty much.
I agree, and if there's another takeaway point that you remember from me, it's that I think that there's a bigger lesson to take away, which is what is our capacity and ability to operationalize statewide. And I think PBL might be serving as sort of a public example of the variance in the field for local context that matters. And so can we provide targeted support, and what is that support and how does it look, rather than just sort of general support or not out there. And so I would encourage folks to see this and zoom out a little bit as the next thing comes, or the other 3 or 4 things that are already on the books is, what's our ability to target, support, and have sustained commitment for good ideas and good initiatives.
And I would like to see, I want to just piggyback up on that because, well, 2 things. One, we're getting really close to
Yeah, people want.
But secondly, I think that segues really well and just gives Sue an opportunity to bring this back down honed for board members of the VSBA position regarding this through our resolutions. And obviously, as we saw earlier, our agenda for world-class education, which was, input to all of this. So, Sue, if you want to.
Yes, sure. So we do have a resolution on the books that talks about proficiency-based learning. I'll just read you part of it. It says, the VSBA believes that students learn best when they play an active and meaningful role in their education. The learning styles, interests, and aptitudes of each student should drive instruction and learning activities in every school, as opposed to standardized programs designed to prepare students to perform well on state standardized assessments. All schools must provide equitable access to meaningful and rigorous learning experiences that will allow students to demonstrate proficiency in multiple ways. So that is the resolution that the VSBA has. It's 3A. And just wanted to let all of you know that I have been invited into the Senate Ed Committee to testify about proficiency-based learning, and that my testimony would be, based on this resolution and the history that the organization has with proficiency-based learning. I was able to sit in today and hear Mike testify, and also Don Tinney, the president of the Vermont NEA, testified today, and Jay Nichols, the executive director of the Vermont Principal Association. So I was able to hear their testimony. I think it was very helpful in me thinking about preparing what I'll be saying. But I don't think it will be any surprise that it's going to be based on the resolution and the history of our organization.
What did the NEA say? This is Lori Childers also. What did the NEA say?
That you can read. They submitted written testimony. I would say it was probably 4 or 5 pages long, wouldn't you, Mike? Mm-hmm. And I think they came around in the end to saying that, well, they said that it has worked very well in some places. There are some places that have had challenges, and that in order to address the challenges, they talked about scalpel rather than a sledgehammer, I think is how it was spoken about, right, Mike? Did you have anything to add about what?
I think it's exactly it.
Yeah. But you can certainly, I could send you a link to their testimony.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Are you able to join us for dinner?
I'm going to stay for a little while. Yes.
Suburban chicken.
We're doing our best to try to sell it. Only as an opportunity if board members have additional questions.
Yeah, I'll stick around for that for sure.
For dinner.
I'm going to run to another thing in a little while. But,
Mike, do you think we can entice you to do a webinar?
Sure.
Good time to ask them.
So why don't we do this, board? Why don't we break for dinner? If you've got questions that you didn't get a chance to ask Mike, then feel free to use this time to do that. And we'll pick it up again at 6:30.
Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Mike.
I don't think it's showing. Kevin, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Kevin, can you hear me?
As a parent.
It was terrible. Terrible.
Well, you know, it was funny because Jim
So they've got it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you all that. Me too. Taxpayers want to see the good scores. Yeah.
She did as Don't mention that. It's a long story. To a law firm.
Where is this?
Burlington. He's the one I kids I would have picked. They have said, I live in the dream. Lawyer. I feel like national resources.
now
But the other thing is.
What's it versus Russell?
I was bored.
Yeah.
You know,
Public schools are good.
Budget.
We gotta step up. You got confidence. They're pretty darn good. I mean, you ought to be measuring stuff.
You do have, but it was.
But in terms of the kids' outcomes, I mean, the outcomes, they provide are incredible. I mean, you saw that. Yeah.
Wow, and how do you?
Just fun. Right.
Reading?
What's got
Yeah. You like lying? Yeah. This building is sprinkled. Surprised?
Whoa, already? When is this? I just started the co-op.
I know. Have you ready?
Hi, Adrian.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
you're missing your meetings.
I'm just really hoping they sort of clean up the system for next time.
Like the, yeah.
And just having that.
If I don't hear you guys start, my friends that want to like sit.
Oh,
Let me know if I'm not here.
I'll put the shape on.
I imagine. How it's played out.
Would you be willing to participate again?
I'm on it for 6 years. So,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
yeah, it's not a one-time deal.
Oh, that's
Well,
great.
there were a couple of different.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Driving.
Oh, I think that's really good. It's
Yeah.
good to have that experience.
No, she didn't, she didn't even try.
Totally off topic.
You got.
You know Linda Sullivan?
And the instructor was so thorough.
She's our resident.
Okay.
And,
I don't know her.
Dorsey, the mountain towns,
Okay.
Danby,
And what's her deal?
all that. Trying for state audit. This is Doug Hopper's a state auditor now. And
Unexpected.
Linda's actually an auditor.
with, please tell them both. She also did MBA, a lot of great. She is our rep now. She's actually kind of become publicity because she's Democratic. That's what I always call her pretty much. So she was the one, she was just in the newspaper last week. Ended up saying she was
Yeah, I mean, she made a case study because their policy was even more
treasurer
pro than ours currently is. And then they had some of the issues that have popped up here, and then they even further back, where in most of the schools, as it's playing out, are just like, you know what, we're good. We're just gonna do what we think is best.
So I'm looking for ways to reach the territory. So far, basically, I read was, I guess either one of two answers. One, she can't do that because she has to keep being our rep. Or, a few people, I'm glad that she let me know.
Wow. Turn around that she actually goes to moral compass.
Is it public?
What she does, there was a discussion about exactly why she voted.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Introducing and thinking, I'm trying to figure out how to start engaging other
We're getting some feedback from parents.
Some of that.
So they postponed the first no idea.
Oh,
That's funny. Ours actually are, but we were just, I think we're using, one, that's how they always translate it. So the show, and we're still translating. And so they're, yeah, right. I think it's a comfort and yeah, we have one teacher who is sticking with the 100 points. Really? Does she have justification? In home computer, in her own system. So we have a 1 to 4.
no, I haven't followed it really closely.
Oh, great.
And I. Sure. No, it is. And then the chair.
Yes, everyone's been.
No.
Well, see, I find that.
Okay, we're doing.
Now here, you have everything in on time. I don't have to look at it. I don't have to still feedback in it. And you can go into the here and not realize that I lost. Yeah, I then scramble.
We did. She mentioned about the
Central. I don't know what you do. And for the most part, we started.
No, I was just saying that. Yeah.
That helped. Now, we're pretty well caught up. You have a question? He's struggling with this.
Very frustrating. It feels like you're working on time. There's
I'd like to. Right. Okay, that's. Yeah.
How's our? So I was there, in January.
Well, I can go back to this. No, I'm gonna bank. I'm the line. My inventory is all in the warehouse. After a day, good outfit.
I don't know.
They have on their line of credit.
We had a little snow event last week. Oh, you didn't get any?
You guys didn't get any?
So you can say, you know, you your life already.
Yeah, exactly. So I usually videotape. That's okay. But tonight, because we had our speaker, our next speaker, couldn't be here, so she's going to present on here. So I was like, well, I just record the whole thing this way instead of the other way. So might be alternative from now on, but she's not on yet.
Bourbon chicken is delicious.
Isn't that wonderful? Oh my God, I love it. I love that. I don't know, it's not just like regular green beans. I really garlic.
Sometimes I was feeling it from the.
She's always afraid of putting garlic in because she's a garlic eater. She's like, oh yeah, the meetings, and
Really?
I'm like, no way, garlic.
You know?
So we're not kissing. It's a meeting.
Oh, good.
Down there.
Really nice.
Yeah, oh yeah, they can put their hands up or they can, I can unmute them. Kevin, I don't think has a microphone set. He sent me a message and said he can't speak because he's not set up to speak.
I don't know what we're getting.
Oh, yeah. So this is the new, I think this one we're doing now. It's going to be a new system because it seems to work better. And you have to, people that are just listening only get so much, and this way they can see whatever we see. So. And the recording goes up on the website regardless, so this way it's just as good. But our speaker's not on yet. It's supposed to be at 6:30.
Right down the road from them.
Well, it's not on this. Well, it never went off, but I'll be cutting this part out.
Say hi to everybody.
Let me get.
I like that you can actually manipulate that video too.
Yeah, you can see whatever's on the screen is what you'll see on the website. Oh yeah, yeah. Yes. And who wants to watch a video? I like to edit down the webinars and take out like the explanation part where they talk about how to ask questions and stuff because when they're watching the recording they can't do any of that, so it's useless.
Wow.
She's not there yet. She's not there yet.
Okay.
What do you think?
And then I know the line. If you want me to just let me know. I do feel it. Yeah. It's actually more like slow. Learning more.
Yeah.
Do you want? Oh, you're eating one. I was gonna say, do you want
They're
those
the
cookies?
best. Her
They are
cookies
so good. They are just like soft. She makes them right before they come too, so they're so soft.
You know, my kids used to, if I made cookies, they used to take them to the microwave.
Oh yeah. Yep. It works for muffins too. Yes, when I buy muffins from the store, they're usually refrigerated and they're kind of hard to put in the microwave for 15 seconds.
Yeah, because usually bread things go well in the microwave.
Yeah, but as long as you keep it under like 15 seconds. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a thing until like a couple of months
Kevin,
ago.
can you hear me?
Yeah. When you're trying to get someone's attention and. When you
And
white
he said
text from
school
the.
refusal? Is that,
Wonderful.
I mean.
Just want to make sure. Kevin, I have a question. Can you see the video of the room and the resolutions, or just one or the other?
Neil, when your wife texts you from the bedroom and says, is the coffee ready yet?
Friday.
I mean,
No, I'm sitting here, like the teenage boys, during the course of that morning, I had 17 text messages. It was all about where they're gonna get picked up and what time and where they need to go afterwards.
Oh.
Okay, so Neil, I got a question for you then. What is a MOOC? M-O-O-C?
Do we have TV?
There. Huh.
MOOC.
Yeah.
I'm asking Kevin questions to see what he can see on the screen.
I'm missing the second O, like but it's basically like a real, like think about, like a really big section.
But everybody's all over that.
Everybody's online, the instructor is there,
One of those situations where
you know, in the forum, in the video, and again, people can.
a lot of people.
Massive open online courses.
So can you see the video of the people in the room and the screen that has the resolutions on it? Or one or the other? I have a webcam up for the room that it should be showing, but it may not. And the resolutions are up on the screen right now.
Oh my God. Right.
I don't know if it's because I'm lazy or because it's the only way to get there.
Yeah, probably. Oh, I know.
I don't want to use the whole thing. You have to help me.
Like, why do I gotta hear about you talking to movie? They never hear you anyway. So you're gonna have it pop up on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everyone in that.
How old were they when they got their first phone?
Oh, I think she's here.
No. Oh, no, and if you were to believe them, they were the last. Everybody else lived in this. Everybody else had. Except for us. Oh, yeah.
Oh, she's gone.
I drove down.
She's here, no, she's gone. She was just here, now she's gone. She might be having problems connecting.
Can you hear me?
She was on, she's off.
Okay. So, I'll email her.
Oh, no, I made her. Can you hear me? I didn't think about this part. I might need to get some speakers to show the speaking. Please have me some speakers.
Okay, so we're gonna get started in a couple of minutes, so if you had your eye on a cookie and you haven't gotten it yet,
Definitely go get it.
I will arm wrestle you for it.
I just ate it.
I hope so. I'd like to think so. And,
No,
Well, that's.
scroll.
I am on the webinar and I can see you and I am talking, but I don't think you can hear me.
All members of
Oh, there.
Very long.
Yeah.
right now.
You wouldn't want to add
I'm not in that position.
Muted.
Can Okay, let's try it again.
Unmuted.
Tina, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Tina's gone. She said that she's back. I think she's having a hard time staying connected.
Just tell her that you were setting up speakers so that we can hear her.
Okay. Tina, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I'm gonna make you a presenter if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? We are all in CLU. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now, Tina?
I can. Can you hear me? I can hear everyone, but you can't hear me. And I think the problem is that for some reason, it invites me in listen only mode.
Can you hear me?
Period. That was the same with the phone line. It says I am in listen only mode.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you, but I don't think you can hear me.
We cannot hear you.
No, No.
Can you hear me now, Tina? Are you speaking, Tina?
I can hear you, but I don't think you can hear me.
I got you over here.
It's my speakers, it's not me.
We'll just get a little bit of an echo though.
Yes, if you're speaking.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay, we got you too.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Yay.
I'm gonna turn you this way.
Well, she's also a share. Well, she will be in a second.
So is she on those speakers as well?
Not the speakers, but the visual.
Oh, okay. So we're back.
But you can hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, sweet. Okay, good. I apologize. I tried to connect by phone because I was racing back from my son's basketball game, but the phone line says you're only able to participate and listen only. So I'm not sure. But in any case, I'm here. So thank you.
So we
and
are.
You got me kind of raggedy looking because I did just come from the game, so I apologize.
So we are all set if you just want to jump in.
Yeah, so I appreciate your support last year of Tobacco 21, and I talked to Sue because I wanted to see if we could also get you to support another issue that the Heart Association and the Coalition for Tobacco-Free Vermont is working on, and I did share with Sue some of our talking points or one-pagers, but in short, as you probably heard in the schools that you work with, the e-cigarette crisis is far from solved. We think that Tobacco 21 was a good step, but it only went into effect in September. So it's kind of hard to know if it's working. We know that compliance at stores has gone up a little bit, but the kids are really getting these products elsewhere. And the Youth Risk Behavior Survey kind of confirmed what we feared. Because it's done every 2 years, there's kind of a lag being able to understand what's happening with students. And the e-cigarette youth in Vermont doubled in 2 years. So it's now at 28%, which is really alarming because more than 1 in 4 Vermont students are now using e-cigarettes. And what we wanted you to consider for possible support is there's legislation at the State House this year. It's S-288. But more importantly, what it does is it would eliminate the sale, so ban the sale of any flavored tobacco products. So that would mean flavored e-cigarettes, but it would also mean menthol cigarettes. And, you know, we feel like there's a good sense of lawmakers wanting to do something about the e-cigarette crisis. They get it. They were supportive last year. It's whether or not they'll include menthol in that mix. But also, we feel it's just as important to eliminate the sale of menthol tobacco. And just to give you a really quick background, in 2009, the federal government banned all flavored tobacco cigarettes, but they left menthol as the one exemption. And it's a real problem. And what we're concerned about is it has been disproportionately marketed by the tobacco industry to youth and African Americans and people of color. And so the use rates by those groups are very high. And we see it as a health equity issue. For instance, African Americans who smoke, 85% smoke menthol just because the average community. And the same is being done with kids. And one of the reasons it's such an issue for kids is, if you can imagine, so menthol is in cough drops. That's what makes your throat feel better, right? It has that cooling sensation. Menthol cigarettes are the same way. They have that cooling sensation, and they eliminate that burn and the cough that you feel when you smoke. So it's, and I hate to say it's a nice way, but of the cigarettes to try, kids like it because it's a lot less harsh than other cigarettes. And the problem is people who start smoking with menthol tend to be addicted more. They inhale greater because it doesn't hurt in the same way. They become addicted harder, and it's much harder to quit. So we want lawmakers to address the whole package, flavored e-cigarettes and menthol cigarettes. And just to give you an update as well, so you might have heard the FDA did institute a new policy change, and it was on e-cigarettes and flavored e-cigarettes. So some people kind of feel like the problem is solved, but it really isn't. And please ask me any questions about any of the products, because I feel like there's new stuff every day. But when people think of e-cigarettes, what they tend to know about is Juul, that long skinny thing that sort of looks like a flash drive that really kind of led to this problem. Most kids use Juul, and that's why the e-cigarette use skyrocketed so much. With the recent FDA ruling, what they said was you can't have flavored e-cigarettes that are pod-based, cartridge-based, that's Juul. But what they left still available are the ones that you can fill on your own. And also, and adults tend to use a lot of those, but kids are too, and they're vaping all kinds of stuff in them because you can fill it yourself. But they also exempted flavored disposable cigarettes, e-cigarettes rather, and they are. I think I sent Sue, but I'm not sure, and if I didn't, I will send. The New York Times did a story recently about this ruling and what's been happening. And what's happening is Juul is already becoming old school, because Juul on its own decided to pull all of its flavors except for mint and menthol. And so now kids know that you can't really get flavored Juul other than mint and menthol. So these disposable cigarettes, if you want to Google it, they're called like Puff Bar. They look very similar to Juul, but in funky colors. And they're disposable, so they're worse for the environment as well. Like, they're bad for kids in general, but they use them, they puff them, and they throw them away. And so those are still available, and they've become the hot new thing. There's other ones as well. And the e-liquids that can go in these refillable containers are still all the nasty flavors that kids like, everything from gummy bear to creme brulee. And there's even one called unicorn puke, which is, very attractive to kids. Clearly it's not marketed to adults because it's something that kids would think is neat. So we're asking legislators to eliminate the sale of all flavored tobacco, and that would include those that were exempted by the FDA, as well as menthol cigarettes. And I could tell you a lot more, but I just want to make sure that you have time to ask me anything you want.
Yep. So do board members have any questions?
Would you repeat the name of the House or Senate bill which has been proposed on that?
Yeah, it's S-288. Senator Ginny Lyons is the main sponsor of it, and she's also the Senate Health and Welfare Committee chair. There are a handful of other senators who are also co-sponsoring it with her. There's a companion bill in the House. I don't have the number in front of me. It's pretty much identical, but the Senate Health and Welfare Committee has been holding a number of hearings on this legislation, and Senator Lyons is really holding strong on both the e-cigarettes and the menthol cigarettes part. There are some who want to deal with just e-cigarettes, but we really firmly want to make sure that menthol cigarettes remain part of this bill as well, because if lawmakers just eliminate what they see as a crisis, just the flavored e-cigarettes, we know that kids will move to the available flavor. We saw that when, as I mentioned, Juul voluntarily pulled all of its flavors except for mint and menthol off the market when they started getting a lot of bad press about, attracting kids. And use of mint and menthol skyrocketed as a result because the kids all moved to mint and menthol. And so our fear is you have all these kids addicted now to nicotine from e-cigarettes. And you take all just the flavored e-cigarettes off the market, where do you think they're going to go? They're going to go to that nice smooth smoke that the menthol cigarette provides. And so we just really want to make sure we don't make it easy for kids to smoke either or vape either. Yeah.
There's Addison. Hi. Is there any states that have adopted this legislation or?
Yeah, Yes, so there's only one so far. Massachusetts, right around Thanksgiving, passed it. It's the only state so far. There have been some communities in Massachusetts prior to Massachusetts passing as a state, and California, I think Berkeley. But Massachusetts is the only state, and theirs was very comprehensive. It included all the things I said, but it had other elements, tobacco-free provisions in it as well. But they are the only state so far. There are many states who are interested in this. And there are some states that you probably heard this summer, we started hearing a lot of these terrible lung illnesses that were related to e-cigarettes. So some governors took emergency action and banned e-cigarettes or flavored e-cigarettes because they were fearful of what was happening. It seems like a lot of those are kind of adulterated products, but that's kind of started states kind of looking at this closer. That aside, even if that hadn't happened, the flavors are what we know are hooking kids because they try it for the flavor. In the fact sheet that I sent you, it says 97% of youth e-cigarette users report using a flavored tobacco product in the last month, and 70% cite flavors as the reason that they started. They're neat, and a lot of kids don't think that there's nicotine. You know, it's like it's cherry, it's bubble gum, it's whatever the flavor is. And unfortunately, with e-cigarettes, that's what's different than cigarettes is you have technology too. So it's kind of like the hot trend. And they go, like I said, they went to Juul, and now they have these puff bar e-cigarettes that are disposable. So they just kind of go to the latest and greatest, and the flavor is what's making them do it. What's scary too in Vermont is not only has the e-cigarette use doubled by youth, the frequency that they're using it has doubled as well. It was only 15% in 2017 of the kids who said they were daily users. Now it's 31% of the kids who use e-cigarettes, 31% vape daily. And that's a sign of addiction. So it is very alarming. And you know, it's alarming from another point of view too, because kids who use e-cigarettes are 4 times more likely to transition to traditional tobacco. And so we've done really, really good at getting kids off tobacco, traditional cigarettes. In fact, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey showed our youth smoking rates, prevalence rates went down to 7%, so lowest it's ever been. But the e-cigarette rates are really through the roof, and it's drawing kids back.
This is Adrienne Raymond from Rutland. Is there an effort also to try and make this a federal law? I just went on my iPad and you can order for, you know, $9.99 to $10.99 just by saying you're 21, anything.
Yeah.
Our kids know how to do that.
Yeah, and you know, so yes, to answer your first question, yes, but this is the FDA ruling is kind of what happened. So President Trump, late summer, I think it was, at the urging of the First Lady, who was concerned about all the flavors, said she wanted to ban all flavors. And he said, I'm on it, we're going to do it. And then he started backpedaling as the industry and the tobacco lobbyists said, you'll lose votes if you do this. And so what happened instead was this FDA ruling that eliminated just the flavored pod-based e-cigarettes like Juul. However, they didn't eliminate all the flavors, even with the pod-based ones. They still left menthol on the market for those, but you can still have any flavor you want in the kinds of e-cigarettes that you fill yourself and the disposable ones. So it really didn't go very far at all. In terms of what you were just finding on the internet, you know, it's kind of a crazy world because Vermont last year, one of the things the legislators did was ban internet sales in Vermont. You should not be, it's illegal to buy them on the internet, but it is still very easy to do that. You know, you can lie about your age and, you know, it's hard. And we've talked to students. We met with the Above the Influence students at Burlington High School in the fall, and we asked about it. And they market to each other on social media, Instagram, Snapchat. That's how they find out where the good deals are. So it's still relatively easy to get. And so, you know, what we like to say is last year we tried to address the accessibility and availability with the internet ban in Tobacco 21, but now we have to address what the enticability is of these products, and that's flavors. The flavors are what is making the kids want to have these things. And if we take them away, the chances that kids are going to just want to vape tobacco, it would leave, this legislation would be tobacco as a flavor in both cigarettes and e-cigarettes. But that's not something that kids are likely going to want. And so, we have heard from some smokers. We haven't personally, because the legislator said that they have heard from smokers who want to keep flavored e-cigarettes to quit. But there is no science really that shows that e-cigarettes are an effective smoking cessation device. And it's actually illegal for the manufacturers to market that. The FDA has an approval process, and they actually will allow e-cigarette manufacturers to apply to have them approved as a smoking cessation device, and none have yet. So what they have found is when smokers try to use e-cigarettes to quit, some may, there may be some, but most dual use, so they use e-cigarettes at the same time they use cigarettes, which is really dangerous because you're getting nicotine from both now. Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out that when you said there was it went from 15% daily use to 31% daily use,
yeah.
We're talking about 2015 and 2017. Is that a correct statement?
No, 2017 to 2019.
It is 2017 to 2019.
Yeah, to 2019, yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's sad because, when we were trying to pass Tobacco 21, we knew that youth risk behavior survey results hadn't come out, and we feared that the use was higher. And when we, they passed Tobacco 21 last year, but we had started earlier asking, and in the length of time it took them to pass it, this is what happened. So it's great that they did finally pass it, but Tobacco 21 was actually enacted nationwide, so it is in all states now, but really it's, it's still a crisis because kids can still get these, and we want to take away what makes them want to get these.
Tina, can I ask, so the current language in 288 references both the sale and the possession. What are your thoughts on the possession end of this?
We don't like it at all. In fact, we're working, so I don't think I have it in front of me, but so the Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, the Vermont Medical Society, many of our public health partners do not want to penalize kids for possessing and purchasing. It may sound unusual, but really, like I said, with menthol, they're marketed too heavily, right? And nicotine is in this, and they're addicted. And so we don't want to penalize them twice. And also the science doesn't show that's effective by slapping a fine on them. So there was language in there that says possession. Probably what you're looking at is the original bill. The committee hasn't voted on it. That's why the original bill is still there. If you go to, and I'm happy to send it to you, but if you go to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee site, there is a marked up document it's kind of a draft that they're working on. We did express concern that there was language in there that said possession, and we don't want it in there. We don't want kids penalized for either possessing or purchasing. We would be okay with, I'm spacing on the name of what it's called, but when somebody tries to pretend that they're an age that they're not, to try to get them, that's the only penalty we would be okay with. We would prefer, and what we asked the committee to do was to instead increase the fines on the retailers who sell these to kids against the law. The fine is very small now, and we want it to be the owner operator, not the clerk. We want the store owners to take responsibility for that. We don't want possession, and one of the experts that we brought to the State House to testify on this is Dr. Phil Gardner. He's from the University of California, and he's an expert he's the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. What we don't want to have happen is somebody, and it's their concern as well, that somebody will be
We lost you for a second, Tina. Can you hear us?
She's talking, she's moving, there's no sound.
I think it's the internet connection.
Probably.
Can you hear me now? I think I unmuted it.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
So I pulled draft number 2.1. I think that's the latest draft.
Yeah, and I think it still has, I don't know if you can see the word purchase in it. I just looked at a draft tonight that I think it has purchase under the youth section. I think it's not in front of me. And I hate to pull it up because I feel like I might lose you guys. But we will be working. The committee is very, they don't want the possession language in there. That was just kind of a standard lingo that legislative council put in there. They're in agreement that should be pulled out. But I think if you see it, there was like highlighted language, and I think purchase is highlighted as if it's been added. And I think it's further down in the bill, but we are opposed to any of that language.
I see it now. Yeah, it's on page 9.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened with this bill is the legislative council staff person was trying to kind of clean up existing statutes because there's definitions in many different tobacco laws. And so she was trying to kind of one pointed at the other, and it was kind of confusing. And she tried to add a definition for e-liquids. And in doing so, she pulled other statutes into the law. It started as a 2-page bill, or bill rather, not law. And it's now many pages. And it's really just a lot of it's cleanup, but in some of that cleanup, it inserted some language that we don't really care for, the possession and purchase stuff. Yeah.
So I
Yes.
need to make a motion relative to this, Tina, and see where the board comes down. And I believe it will be in support of your efforts.
Go ahead.
Shall I go ahead for it?
Well, we can't do anything until you do, so.
Okay. I have the floor. The motion is that the VSBA supports a ban on the sale of flavored cigarettes, flavored e-cigarettes, and flavored substances that contain nicotine or are otherwise intended for use in an e-cigarette.
Is there a second to the
Okay.
motion? Second from Amy McMullen Windsor. Any discussion?
Should we communicate that we are not in favor of possession, penalty for possession?
It's not included in the motion, so.
So Dan's motion did only reference the sale. That's the reason why I asked the question, to make sure the motion reflected the current
Possession.
approach of the committee. So I thought that a motion regarding the topic was better for the VSBA than a specific motion to sign on to the letter. Because then if the VSBA board is willing to support the motion, then I think that gives the latitude to the executive director to then sign on to the legislation.
And I don't know if this is an appropriate place to mention this since you're in the middle of a motion, but the Principals Association did get back to us and said they are supportive, but they kind of wanted to just wait till all three of kind of the education leaders organizations had a chance to weigh in, so it would be stronger with all three. So, but they are supportive.
Sure. Thank you for that. Any further discussion, Clarence?
I probably won't support the motion for a couple of reasons. I think that our students do not need to have access to any of this. We ought to just say, no, I don't care how we do it. If they brought beer to school, we'd crack down, we wouldn't allow it. We shouldn't allow this. I can see that. But we have a perfect example of where they started banning alcohol and how long did it take prohibition for it created a wicked black market and other things. We don't need to go there. These are adults. Monitoring adult behavior is a step too far for me. I will ban it. I'll sign on to everything for minors. I think if they shouldn't smoke, they shouldn't have access. They shouldn't have any of it. I'm totally in favor of that. But this, where you take it away, something away from adults, even if it's bad behavior, we're going to ban alcohol next. With great alcoholics, going to ban opiates. You can't prescribe them even legally because some people get hooked on them. You know, I think we're headed down the wrong road. It goes too far for me. I didn't say anything a year ago when we signed on to the 21 over because it was not my place to say anything sitting over there with the gavel. But the age majority is what it is. I think it's wrong to take rights away after they've been given to adults. I just, that's how I feel. Below it, when they were minors, I think we should very easily say no and enforce it. I have no problem with enforcing it with minors, and I don't think our kids in school should be smoking in vaping, period. It should be really against the law to do it. I'm totally in favor of that, but this goes, in my mind, goes too far.
Any other board member have a comment or question related to the motion? Seeing none, going once, going twice.
I have one thing, just clarification. So as a school board, we're looking at only at minors, but this law is just, it would be blanket across the state that menthol sick for everybody. And New Hampshire hasn't yet passed anything like this, or New York.
Dave, I don't know if that's something you wanted me to answer, or if you're just talking.
Oh, no, yeah, it's in Massachusetts, but the other neighboring states.
They have not yet, and I guess the answer is sort of, I don't know, I feel like was sort of alluded to a little bit. Yes, it was it would apply to youth and adults, but the menthol piece, while adults do smoke menthol cigarettes, the concern is, as I mentioned, it's youth initiation, but the youth are the biggest users actually of menthol cigarettes. 54% of kids who smoke use menthol, and that's a much higher percentage than any other group who smokes menthol, other than African American adults. And 7 out of 10 Black kids use menthol too. So it's hugely, its use rates are very high among kids.
Any other comments or questions? All right. All on the motion, all of those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Have it. Nina, thank you very much for taking some time.
Thank you.
And joining us.
Can I ask one last question? I don't know your name. I'm sorry. I can see you on my screen, and you're on the right-hand side of my screen. The woman who asked about possession. I would love to just hear your thoughts in general. You don't have to vote on it or anything, but how you feel about penalties for possession or purchase for kids, just so we have an understanding of, how others feel about that.
Are you asking me my personal opinion on this?
Well, anybody who wants to answer, but you had raised it as just, it's just, I'd love to hear more from, from school board's point of view, your thoughts on it, since you obviously deal with kids a lot.
I don't personally see any benefit to prosecuting or punishing children for a habit that adults are shoving down their throats.
Yeah.
I have a real problem with that. So.
Yeah.
And I actually, I have a little bit of a problem with punishing adults, as a matter of fact, in the same manner.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really very much appreciate the opportunity. So thank you. And if you have any questions, have Sue reach out to me. I'm happy to answer as it moves along.
Perfect. So thank you for taking the time to join us tonight.
Of course. Have a great night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. We're a little bit behind, but I promise we'll still be okay. We'll be okay. Other legislative issues update.
So Sandra and I are both chiming in here. She's going to start out about.
So the 4 topics I'm going to cover are after school, school meals, literacy, and pre-K. And I think I'll save pre-K for last because I anticipate the most conversation there. So the after school bill currently is S335. It's an after school task force. As was highlighted as a priority for the governor in the state address. And it's a task force of 15 people, including either our executive director or a designee of our organization, as well as VSA, VPA, and VCSEA, independent schools, home study programs, and other after-school programs. So this committee is charged to come together no later than June 30th of 2020 and work for 6 months together, and then issue a report by December 15th of 2020, outlining a framework for and funding for universal after school across the state. The charge has been to look for funding other than the Ed Fund as a primary funding source, and they are considering cannabis as a potential revenue for after school.
Oh, yeah.
That's not allowed in community.
Is the thinking around this about daycare, is that, or is it extending the school day? What's the thinking?
Aligning schedules with working parents and keeping kids engaged in purposeful activity.
And there is an equity issue around this. I think there's a lot of working class people who have big benefit.
Because there's a cost to this, it was voted out of the Senate Ed Committee to Appropriations. They fine-tuned a couple of things around, limited the number of meetings, and passed it on favorably. So that's where we are.
Good. So I just on this, I keep thinking about, okay, we're going to be on to pre-K later, where we have 10 hours for 35, and let's toss on the after school without even, discussing whether or not we maybe fill out pre-K a little bit more. It's like throwing another thing into the fire when we've got a lot of fires. Really.
There was very little conversation about whether the universal after school would include pre-K. And right now, they're saying no. I think the layers of regulation around having pre-K kids in an after-school program is pretty complex. So we'll see if they can return to that
I'm
conversation.
making a comparison between, in our SU, we actually, we have in the budget, we're asking for voters to approve, we bumped it up to 20 hours of pre-K because we're trying to create some level of equity, and the 10 hours just doesn't do it. And, we're funding that out of our budget. And then it's like, okay, after school, there are lots of things that would be great to do, but maybe you deal with the problems you already have, before you create a new program that's going to require funding. That's all.
Michelle Braun, Washington Orange. I totally agree with you, but I will say that I think this is timely for at least my own home district, where we've been having this conversation about after school, because we had a change up in how our after school programs work, and we had just the biggest outpouring of parents I have ever seen saying we need more options for after school coverage. And we reflected on the fact that we have athletic programs that we offer free of charge to families just because that's the way it's always been. But we don't have anything other than the athletic programs that, anything else people have to charge for. So why is that? And so we're starting to think about, what's sort of our range of things we can offer and how are we paying for it. So we'll certainly welcome the work of that.
We've also, we have some after school programs that we decided again to throw on our budget, because you're right, it's another important need of the community.
Yeah, Amy?
Another part of the equity question on it is with Act 46 of districts coming together, there might be one district that has had an after-school program and another that doesn't. And then when they come together, trying to decide how that after-school is going to be applied to all of the towns or whatever of the new districts. And that's a really tough conversation.
Keep going.
Okay. Next is universal school meals / local sourcing. So there are two bills, H812 and S223, so it's in House and Senate, that would require all public schools to provide free breakfast and free lunch, as well as meals during the summer with a few criteria that would be met. The cost of the meals that are not reimbursed through federal funds or other sources would be borne by school districts and ultimately the Ed Fund. And that would happen by the AOE, or in this 5-year transition period, the AOE would award grants to supervisory unions to help them initiate or expand their food service program, really looking for efficiency. And so there's an emphasis on working together within an SU or even working with neighboring SUs to find the most cost-effective way to do this. The amount of the grant would be limited to 75% of the cost deemed required to construct, renovate, or acquire additional equipment to meet the requirement. The summer meal criteria is if 50% of students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and if the school operates a summer program or hosts, this is an interesting, or hosts an education or recreation camp. So if you had a summer camp going, you would also be required to provide meals for that. The goal is 20% of food by local producers by 2022, and that would be reported annually by school districts along with your budget to the Agency of Education. There's a little stipulation about meal consumption time would still count as instructional time, so they don't want a negative effect of feeding kids breakfast. So they don't want a deduction of instructional time for feeding kids breakfast. And it creates one full-time position with the Agency of Education. There's quite a substantial with the universal meals. Do you remember what Jeff said? I don't want to quote it. Millions.
Yes, it's in the millions.
It's substantial.
Substantial millions.
Yes. So there is a proposed alternative, which is S273, which would create incentives for schools to purchase locally produced foods. And the way that you would be incentivized to do this is through a report, you would let the AOE know what percentage of your food is coming locally, but school boards would have to define what local means to them. And then the greater the percentage of food from a local source, the higher your incentive payment would be. So, and their goal is that by 2023, 20% of all breakfast, lunch, and summer meals would be locally produced.
That incentive fee probably comes from the Ed Fund, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's going to be there's no other funding.
Well, that's the alternative. Fine, just cut it up differently, you know.
Are they talking about instituting a sales tax for cannabis this year?
Yeah,
Yes,
that has been discussed.
Yeah,
Thinking about it last year.
I'm sorry,
Yes, right.
Sandra, I'm sorry, I missed, you said that, unless you had, I think you said, unless you had 50% free and reduced, then you would not be required to do this, or you wouldn't get.
In the first set of bills,
Right.
yes, 50% of free and reduced lunch, you would be required to do summer meals.
Okay,
Yes, but it would be universal breakfast and lunch for all students,
Got it.
right?
Right. Okay.
So the difference between these two approaches is the first couple of bills are the universal school breakfast lunch. The second bill is not universal but requires local sourcing.
Right.
And have we been offered an opportunity to testify on these?
No, we haven't. But I'm sure that we will. They haven't been covered by the Ed committee yet.
Okay. And I would assume that at least some portion of our testimony would relate to the resolution on unfunded mandates. Yes.
We use that one a lot.
Okay. Just want to make sure we all understand. Yes, Adrian.
Would it be possible to get your notes? I lost
Oh,
track
sure.
after a
Yeah,
bit.
of
And
course.
I'd love to report back to my school.
Yes.
I think a lot of this stuff was in the legislative update as well, too.
But I don't know, where's
It
the?
just came out.
Just came out, Carrie sent it out
Oh,
on the
okay.
31st of January.
I haven't.
Legislative
that's
update number 2. I believe.
Oh, okay. And all of that was in there? Yeah. Okay.
Yep, it's all in there with
All right,
explanations.
I thought this was all new.
References
stuff.
to bill language.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Thank you, and I will check that. Thank you very much.
Colleen McKinnon in Grand Isle. I'm wondering, do we have, and I may have missed it, data about school lunch funding by budgets, local budgets? You know, for example, our district that I'm part of, we've been funding food programs in our budget, you know, subsidizing it for years, and I'm just wondering what the data are around the state for local budgets funding some portion of meals.
I don't think we have that information, but we do work closely with VSBA through the Education Collaborative. We have a Vermont Legislative Education Collaborative, includes the VPA, the VSA, the VCSEA, which is the Special Educator Administrators, and VSBA and the curriculum leaders. And we meet every 2 weeks to discuss bills, and we can get information like that through VSBA usually.
For me, it would be helpful to see what data tells us about what school districts, local districts are doing before I would feel comfortable taking a position. I mean, I think kids need to eat. I strongly believe in that. But I'd be interested in what the different funding opportunities have been in the state already, or other issues.
The other technicality in it, I think I understand to get the federal funds, the forms need to be completed. If we're offering this universally, how are we getting families to complete the forms to get the federal funds?
That is in the draft bill, that the families would be required to complete that household income form.
But they're gonna, if meals are free anyway, it is likely that that's gonna happen.
No, you're right.
That is true.
That would need to be addressed, I'm pretty sure.
Families had to complete it.
What'd you say?
Unless all families had to complete it.
Right. You have an awful lot of pushback.
Yeah.
Once the incentive to access a resource is gone, I think is what you're saying.
Right.
Exactly. You're not gonna get the paperwork.
Exactly. We're not gonna get the paperwork, we're not gonna get the funding.
Well, I think we already have, you know, there are a number of schools. We have a school in our district that's a universal free meals already because of the poverty level. But the problem we already have is we can't report free and reduced lunch on the same basis. So it's starting to mess up our data because we don't have that data for that school anymore. So I think that's a perfect, I think we're already probably having that. We're probably already having that problem of the lack of data for schools that qualify now.
I know we had a school in our district, they fell under that criteria of poverty, and then they kind of fell out of it. So they went a couple of years of offering complete free to having to go back, and that was really tough on them. It was really tough on them. Parents that understand it.
We had the same thing.
We luckily, in the school that I sit on, we were right on the line, but we decided against it, and we're really glad we didn't.
Do you find that your schools have good compliance with completing those forms? Because we've tried multiple ways of encouraging people, and we still get pushback. So what you were saying is when the incentive's gone as well.
I think speaking just for one school, the principal has worked really hard on that, and he feels like he really has people, if they qualify, he has them fill out the form. So it's a question of public education, I guess, as much as me.
Oh, there are also families that don't want to give that information out.
Yeah.
They will not send the forms in.
So I think you guys are trying to make me miss the 8 o'clock day. So I'm gonna go back to
Hey, okay,
keep
it's off.
going.
You got a good night?
The House Ed Committee has heard a lot of testimony on literacy. They've heard from advocates, they've heard from experts in the field around from those who teach reading, and they had a public comment session where members of the public came and shared their stories. Right now, they are focused on trying to move something forward. They understand the connectivity between improving literacy for struggling students in Act 173, and they're working to address literacy under that bigger umbrella. So the most recent draft that I saw would be a grant, an optional grant, probably competitive program where school districts could apply to receive some funding to address systems level changes around literacy. Just looking to see if there was anything else I wanted to tell you there. And just that it's tight, it's really connected to the DMG report as well, recommendations in the DMG report. That's where we are right now. Literacy. Right? Pre-K.
Okay, quick questions. Where does grant funding come from if not for the ed fund? Does it come from the general fund? It does come from the ed fund. Oh, great. Okay. Wow, this is great. Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry to bring you this news. Okay, and the fourth topic is universal pre-K. So we have already testified twice. We were asked this afternoon to testify again tomorrow. We're on draft 3.1. However, conversation this afternoon I think will lead us to 4.1. And there are some considerable recommendations for change. So I'm just going to run through some of those and you can ask me questions. The first one is clarification of the age of eligibility for a pre-K child. So right now the language is 3, 4, or 5, but not enrolled in kindergarten. And the new language would say 3, 4, or 5 and not eligible for kindergarten, unless the child has an IEP or a 504 plan and is in need of retention, technically. So it's really clarification because that's been very confusing to the field. Another big change would be a separation of agency oversight. So right now, pre-kindergarten is duly regulated by the Agency of Education and the Agency of Human Services. And they're attempting to do some bifurcation with some joint rulemaking so that systems are still moving in the same direction, but there's less regulation. So this seemed to be the best approach that we're talking about right now. So schools would be under this, if this were to move forward, schools would be regulated by the Agency of Education only, unless you operated a child care, public school operated a child care above and beyond those pre-K hours, and you accepted CCFAP, the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, then you would be under AHS. Very confusing. I can talk more about it if you want me to. They are talking about monitoring. Right now, that's dual agency monitoring of every pre-K program. And so they're talking about this bifurcation of public schools being monitored, overarching by AOE, but really monitoring themselves even with the model policy, and private programs being monitored by AHS. They are proposing elimination of eligibility for 3-star programs. And that's primarily because the STARS program underwent a major renovation, and 3-star program, many programs that were 3 stars moved up to 4. So even AHS is in agreement that we can move on to having only 4 and 5-star programs eligible for pre-K. New requirements are that a public school would need to notify its contracted providers if it were to begin or expand its pre-K program. There's negotiation happening right now about how much notification and in what way. So that's what we're talking about. And private programs would need to employ or contract a qualified teacher. The change is currently that teacher needs to be present for 10 hours a week, and the new language would say that teacher would need to be instructing for 10 hours a week. Over a 3-year phase-in, during which time the teacher could be coaching staff. If there's anything else I want to make sure to tell you. Right now, the bill has some language about licensed teacher requirement or Montessori certificate, but there's a lot of consideration for removing that language. And The AOE is tasked to develop uniform forms and processes. So right now, every school district has its own contracts, own payment system with all these providers, and this would simplify the process and standardize the process a bit. So we've just asked that if this moves forward, that our business managers are involved and the people whom will be affected by this could be involved in that. Those are the highlights.
Questions on the pre-K?
Just I like a lot of things that are actually, in there, but, one thing, just curious in the same way as with the healthcare negotiations and all. Is there any discussion when they start talking about, adding some requirements to, they're trying to make, increase the quality of instruction and all, I can understand that, but the offsetting fact of whether or not people are actually going to be able to provide that at a reasonable cost, and it's going to take away capacity. So is there any sort of financial attention to the financial side of the picture?
A lot of conversation about that. And the formula used right now to determine the pre-K tuition reimbursement is based on market value. So if cost goes up and market goes up, the system will evolve, there'll be this chain effect.
It'll adapt to it.
Right.
And that money comes from the ed fund.
The 10 hours, right.
Right, and if it goes up to 12, it would be.
Right now, they're not talking about changing the 10 hours because they couldn't settle on any solid research to say what dosage was evidence-based. So right now, they're not talking about changing the time.
But maybe the per pupil at 10 hours would go, that number would go up. From 30 to 100.
Right, the tuition rate, yes, perhaps, yep.
Yep.
I thought that I recalled there being evidence around utilization with respect to equity because of this 10 hours. So that's not even being considered.
The change in the hours?
Change in hours or some acknowledgement of how to better address the equity issue.
Lots of conversation. And I would say Chair Webb frequently says, we're just looking to make small improvements this year. They know they need to return to it. And the other topic that they are really struggling with, and no one has come to the table with a solution around, is the inequity of kids with disabilities. They're really looking for a way to address that. It likely won't be this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sandy, was there any talk around what the impact is going to be to childcare providers? And I mean, we've already got a shortage, and this is going to put more stress on them and maybe take them out. So,
actually, there's been a member of the House Human Services Committee in all of these conversations, and yesterday, House Human Services ran through this bill together as a committee and talked about questions that they want to bring back to education, and it will need to go through Human Services before it moves on. But the law was passed in 2014. There's been a gearing up of the field for 6 years around building capacity, and we don't have a way to say for sure how the market will respond to that. So everyone is being very careful about decisions that they're making, and this phase-in process is pretty critical.
was there any talk about the market participating in this?
And
that the daycare centers would provide a quality of standard that could meet the requirement and they could be part of this?
one of the things Chair Webb asked today was perhaps a study to ask some questions of the field. How long would it take? Would this be possible for you? What would it cost? So we can end up with a study.
And that's a real danger to workforce housing. Workforce people losing more daycare.
Any other questions on the daycare? Thank you for your efforts there.
Yeah, I have a few I'll try to run through quickly in the interest of time. First, just to let you know that we are extremely busy at the State House. This is my third year working for the VSBA in the State House, and it's the busiest that I've ever seen it, and we are covering more bills than ever and more committees than ever, and so it is definitely busy. Some of the things that I wanted to highlight were S226, which has to do with the statewide bargaining for healthcare. You will see in your packet that Neil has testified twice on this bill, And there are several points raised in his testimony, and the committee has addressed a few of them in its next draft of the bill, but many of them have not been addressed. We are working very closely with the employer commissioners who were appointed by the VSBA and who went through this process, and with their chief negotiator, Joe McNeil, who was here at our last meeting, to present a unified message. And usually we kind of split it up to Neil covers the topics that are most applicable to board members, and Joe is covering the topics that are really very specific to the employer commissioner. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next thing I wanted to let you know about is the weighting study. There has been some testimony on the weighting study. Tammy Colby has been, she's with the professor that worked on the weighting study with two other professors, and she's been in 2 or 3 times to the legislature, to different committees and to joint committees to present the study. Most recently on January 29th, Secretary French came to the House Ways and Means Committee, and he provided a policy recommendation for immediate action by the General Assembly. You can find that online. I can certainly also email it to you if you're interested in it. It's just a 1.5-page document. And next week, the Senate Education Committee is going to be taking some testimony on the weighting study also. So it's definitely moving on, and they're examining it and looking for how they're going to use that weighting study.
So can I add something about the weighting study?
Sure.
My supervisory union, Wyndham Central Supervisory Union, met on Monday night and took a very strong stance in support of, I think it's House Bills 211, 212, 213, 214. I think those are the numbers.
I think it's 910, 911.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
That they strongly supported those bills and the immediate implementation of the recommendations of Secretary French, et cetera. So I just want to make that public comment. Letters will be coming to that effect, but it affects little rural poor schools greatly.
Yes, and those bills, I believe, were sponsored by Laura Sibilia, who's from your area.
Yes.
And next week, as I said, the Senate Ed Committee is going to be taking testimony on the weighting study. Next thing I wanted to cover was State Board, just to give you an update on legislation or bills involving the State Board. There's a bill that the Senate Ed Committee has been taking testimony on that would look at defining the role of the State Board a little bit differently, possibly, and the rulemaking that the State Board does. The bill would split up the rulemaking between the State Board and the Agency of Education. There's been a lot of back and forth between Secretary French and John Carroll, the chair of the State Board, about how that allocation should be allocated. And Kim was there today also in Senate Ed for that part of the discussion. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Kim, about it.
The second time they had, John and Dan had visited, John, the chair of the State Board, and John Carroll and Dan French had presented together a week ago or a little bit more. And Senator Ruth asked that they come together. So the largest area of discussion is the area of rulemaking, and which largely resides with the State Board of Ed, and then other agencies might reside with their agency, within their agency. And the notion that there are some rules that are really specific to the agency that might, in John's opinion, and I think largely within the State Board of Ed, are very administrative and really there's not a lot of value added in the work that the State Board might do on it, but there are others that are directly related to broader educational policy that may have political undertones, for instance, that benefit from, a apolitical body shepherding the process. While the initial draft happens in the AOE, There are interested parties contributing to it, for instance, with Act 173, which is the special ed funding law. There was an advisory group assigned to the legislature to work to provide feedback to the rules process to the state board of ed. The agency was frankly not at all responsive to that in June when we got the draft from them. When the deadline pushed out for the rules, the chair then was a different chair than now, and both sort of took on the responsibility of saying, here's the timeline. We want this input. I sit as a liaison listening in on those advisory group meetings. And then, unfortunately, what's happening through that process is the advisory group has a draft, and the agency doesn't respond to it until sometime immediately before the next meeting, and then the advisory group can't respond. So frankly, the process has been complicated and would have been far less informed had the state board of ed not taken a facilitator role in that to get to the draft that we're about to approve. So with that in mind, these sort of potentially politically charged and those that benefit all students and educators throughout the state seem to benefit from the non-political approach that a state board of ed, and the agency is suggesting that all but a couple of rules should be just taken on by the agency, and they can do all of that, and the state board doesn't need to do any of that. So there is a big difference in opinion, and that has not been able to be reconciled. So John and Dan tried to work together to come up with a set of commonality that made sense. I think it seemed to have been something, and then today's testimony did not reflect that. So we're still pretty far apart. Secretary first, Senator Bruce asked that is there any way to sort of split the baby kind of? And Dan's suggestion was that he had applied a logic and that he's not really interested in negotiating on this, so maybe we don't do anything. So honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen. I think clarity of roles and responsibilities, I think, is important if they're going to do anything with the legislation, because I think it was Act 98 maybe, or whichever it was, that separated the secretary or the agency from the state board of ed in terms of reporting authority, gave us a secretary instead of a whatever it used to be called, commissioner. So that has caused there to be some vestiges of that separation where there's not a whole lot of accountability, often not a lot of responsiveness, and a lot of question marks around where is the state board adding value to process, and where can there be a better working relationship around this body of work to benefit all learners and teachers in the field, basically. It's long, but it's confusing where we are right now, frankly, or what will happen.
Kim, do you think that they would value feedback from VSBA? I mean, I'm not sure quite how we do it, but would they?
I don't know if they've asked you to testify yet.
I will be testifying.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that we've had feedback from the chair of the advisory group, who has provided written testimony, and maybe come in and provide testimony. I think we've all shared a little frustration around some lack of responsiveness from the agency in lots of places. So I think one of the things I think is really important is whatever we do with this legislation should reflect what we would want to see regardless of the working relationship. So personalities aside, what makes sense in this structure? And change makes sense, and it is not happening as collaboratively as you think it should happen, perhaps because of the people right this second, but I do think that this is important to do regardless of the people. So, so I think people who are testifying are hopefully thinking about process and what makes sense, and when it is really important to have sort of a third party overseeing the process that could otherwise feel somewhat political. I mean, it was fundamental. The definition of special ed was being held onto by the agency of ed, and it was not allowing for the flexibilities that the federal definition allowed for. It was months to get the agency to come out.
So I'm going to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Great explanation. Thank you for the background. I think it's beneficial.
You're welcome.
We're going to move on.
it no longer than any testament. No, I'm kidding.
So that can conclude my report. I had a few more things, but I think we can move on next time. It'll be in our legislative report.
Okay.
Do we have a position on proficiency? You've been testifying on that. We haven't
Next
yet.
week on proficiency, yes. And earlier, we talked about the resolution that we have there. Yes.
Lori, did you have a question?
I did. So I got an email from my board chair this afternoon, and she was talking about H805.
Yes.
And she's on the negotiation committee, so she's tuned into this much more than I was. And I know when we got told about this, I heard something about, I heard it on the radio about contracts, teachers being able to end their contracts in the middle of the year.
Well, what it does is it gives the teacher a right while they're under contract to interview for, be offered, and accept a new teaching position for the next school year. And says that interference with that right shall be a cause for a licensing action. So like for a superintendent, if they interfere with that right, it would be a licensing action against a superintendent. So it's definitely very worrisome. And there has been an introduction of the bill to House Committee on General Housing and Military Affairs by the sponsor, but there hasn't been any substantive testimony on this bill yet. They're starting next week to take substantive testimony. And on bills of this type that are very specific to labor and collective bargaining issues, a lot of times our approach is to work with and ask labor attorneys that represent school districts to testify to the committee on the ramifications. So we have been in contact with some of those attorneys, and they've agreed to go in and testify next week on the topic. So that's underway. Yeah.
So this is worrisome.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And that was, if you want to read about it, it's in the last legislative report. It's on page 2, and there's a link to the bill there.
All right. So we're going to move on now. Included in the packet this evening was the strategic plan monitoring report. I am actually just going to make a reference to it this evening. You can read it on your own, but this is how we present up to the board on the efforts of the organization over the past month and the things that we've been working on.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yep. Another thing that came up at our board meeting was that we have had to put a bunch of money in our budget because we have this new accounting software coming through, and they are expecting many hours to implement this software. And I don't know, it's yet another unfunded mandate. And we didn't even put enough in the budget, according to us. There's a lot more than we're doing into other people's budgets. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I'm sorry.
Yes. The next item up is VSBA testimony on S226, which was the statewide bargaining. Do you want me to just?
That's in the packet.
It's in the packet, both the initial testimony and then at the initial testimony, Senator Baruch asked VSBA and the Vermont NEA to meet to try to come up with some areas of agreement on changes. We did meet. We had a good meeting. We came up with a couple of areas of agreement. You will see that in the second testimony document that's in the packet this evening. But essentially, those are the items that we heard from the Bargaining Commission employer, Joe McNeil, at the last VSBA meeting. We had a brief discussion about that. So really, all of the items that you'll see in that testimony there were informed based on that presentation and that meeting, and then a discussion with the executive committee. For our bylaws, though, the executive committee opining and decisions are advisory only, and they come forward to this board at the next meeting. So here we are. This is the testimony that we provided. So you can see the items that the VSBA is testifying about, and it's looking for then this body to either approve the advisory opinion to make it a board level decision or to not approve it.
Mark Clough from Caledonia, I make the motion.
And the motion would be to approve the advisory opinion of the executive committee.
17, yeah.
And is this advisory opinion this? What
It
is
would be a combination essentially of the two
Of the two.
documents of testimony.
Subsequent.
They're both essentially the same.
Okay.
The first one just outlined all of the items that we would like to see in S226. And then the second one then reflected on the positions where us and where the VSBA and the Vermont NEA agreed. And then the other items that we still wanted to see.
Right.
And that was the value of having Joe here meeting before, so we're pretty well up to speed.
Yep.
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
Coach John DeRosa, no second.
Any further discussion, Colleen?
Just one point, I asked it when Joe was here before. I just wonder about the value of limiting the third member of the panel to someone who lives in Vermont. It seems to restrict the there could be people who live in right over the border who would be excellent, and I just wonder about that and would ask for consideration about that in some way.
Yeah, and I believe that there is some work going
Yes.
on in that area,
Yeah.
particularly on the employer commissioner side of things to, I think there's some flexibility in that area too.
But I saw that another way. Maybe they bring some high-powered lawyer from Washington DC up to represent them, and, we like, where's the trade-off?
Yeah.
I mean, is that a risk too, on the other way?
Yeah, I doubt that language is gonna end up in the bill.
Right.
Yeah.
I just, from the conversations that we had, at the executive committee discussions, I think, basic conclusion was everything has to stay on the table and we have to continue to fight for all of the employer commissioners, points. We know we're not going to get them all, but I think that was, a large part of the, defining what Sue and Neil's job was. Please try to get everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're still working on that. The latest version of S226 that is out there right now includes those areas where us and the Vermont NEA were in agreement. And then we have been asked, both sides have been asked to put forward their top two additions to the bill for consideration by Senate Ed. I believe that there is some level of urgency in trying to get this voted out of committee soon. So we will continue to work with the employer commissioners in trying to figure out what those priorities ought to be.
So one quick question, was there any progress on, I think grievances was something that we thought we might come together on?
No, we did not come together on that.
The NEA is totally in favor of splitting this all up and having school boards have grievances in-house so that they can continue divide and then up. Well, so that they have, and then bootstrap. And then
We're gonna, I would say, we do realize the importance of the grievance piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
So that's in our top. Yeah.
it's not,
Any further discussion on the motion?
it's not in the motion, but it's in the paper, and are we gonna, I don't know why there is an issue with the functioning of the VHI. So, are we gonna talk about that?
We're gonna get to that. It's also in the agenda.
Thank you.
I'm still trying to.
Should I just say that we should probably stop all individually still be negotiating to try and put in language that address some of these challenges in our local negotiations, because cash and lieu is not spoken to in the law, so you could address that just as you wouldn't, at least in our contract, we didn't used to allow spouses within our district to get cash and lieu. So now, maybe you don't allow anybody who's getting benefits from the fund.
After attending the negotiations training session, I believe the recommendation is work with your attorney.
Yeah, but I would say we should all keep working on it individually, because these may never happen. Not that we don't want.
Any other discussion of the motion? Seeing none, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, board. Moving on then to the VHI board composition updates.
In your packet, there, right toward the end, there is language regarding amending 24 VSA section 4947D. This has to do with the VHI board, which has been having a very difficult time functioning with 6 members. So the proposal that we would like to consider is adding a 7th member that would be appointed by the Commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation. There's some qualifications set forth here that would guide that appointment. And the exact language of this is still in flux. I've been in touch with the Commissioner of DFR, and he is in support of this idea, but had some other ideas of the qualifications. It wouldn't be drastically changed, but I think he just wanted to take a look at it and make a few tweaks to it, and I don't have that back from him yet. But this is the proposal, because the VSBA is the entity that appoints 3 members to this VHI board. Vermont NEA appoints the other 3 members. So currently there's 6 members. The 7th person would be appointed by the Commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation and would be serving as the chair.
And we might up front make a motion to approve this, like, something similar to this language to be presented, as our recommendation to the recomposition of the VHI board.
So that was a
That was a
motion?
motion, trying to get it on the table anyway for
So before it's seconded, can we discuss that, or do you want to second that?
In order to discuss it, I'm gonna need the second, right? Amy with the second.
Then we can discuss.
So-
Amy McMullen, that was,
Would,
Please say your
I'm just
name
wondering,
and-
though, because we appoint the three members that are from the VSBA, is it appropriate, or do we shoot ourselves in the foot somehow by supporting this legislation here officially? I'm just wondering if we maybe ought to just back away from it and say, we already got the 3 members, we won't take a stance on what's happening here. I don't know, just I'm throwing that out hypothetically.
I think the thought is that it is not functioning at all really right now because of the composition. So this is a way to address that, and we want it to be functioning.
Is it a quorum issue? What's the issue?
oh,
You gotta tell us what
the videos are on our website,
Watch
if
it,
you're
yeah.
ever interested.
What do you mean?
What?
It's
It's
what?
three
Video of
people
board
on
meeting.
Oh, it's
front of
3
each side.
all the time?
Yeah, three.
Yeah.
When did this composition was created? When was this composition created?
It was created through Act 11 in 2018, so it hasn't been very long that it's been this way. And Carrie's right, the VHI board meetings are on the VSBA website. And it would, if you want to watch one, maybe the very most recent meeting would be a good one to look at.
Especially the end.
The end of the most recent meeting.
The dysfunction is the person who's currently the chair, he is not supposed to speak for the board unless he's, approved to essentially speak for the board. But he went
With the vice chair.
with the vice chair, together with the vice chair.
Yeah.
But he just kind of wrote a memo and went off to Senate Ed to get testimony saying, oh, everything's great and all this stuff. It is.
It's non-functioning.
It is.
Yeah,
It is. It's pretty sad.
What was the point of the Act 11 and the change?
Well, the change was Act 11 was a huge statute, and it was, or huge bill. It was at the very end of the session. And it was in conjunction with the statewide bargaining. There was a lot in there. So it all happened, rather quickly.
And the intent was to what? Make it more functional? To
I-
give the NEA more power?
Is it fair to say that actually our side had more representation for a while?
Yes.
They wanted to even it
Yes,
up.
it was. We did have more
So by
representation.
exactly evening it up, they turned it into a non-functional.
It was not well thought.
It wasn't.
So, to answer Dan's question, we feel that by getting someone from VFR to be at that chair position, it can break the logjam that's currently in place there by putting a body in there that's neither Vermont NEA nor VSBA. But someone who does have expertise or at least familiarity with the items that are being discussed and the processes that need to be addressed, and someone to serve in that chair role to be able to get, we're all sitting here tonight without rates on healthcare. It's because of the dysfunction of this board. Okay, so I just make sure that folks understand the practical and local implications of this board's inability to do their job right now. So that's the reason behind this.
I don't want to ask a dumb question, but will this chair be a voting member of it?
When I spoke to the commissioner, what his thought was that the person would vote only to break a tie, which probably is going to be most of the time.
Amy?
The person, I think, after looking at what they're looking for this person, that they might even have an ability to convince others, help them work together.
Yes, that would be great.
That would be, so good.
Yeah.
But. if
Yeah.
not, we get some work done.
Any other comments or discussion on this? Carrie, did you have the motion that Jim made?
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay. Good enough. Lori?
She's gonna make it. Timeline for this implementation? I mean, like.
Well, we're hoping that this makes it into legislation this session.
This session.
And turns into law.
And it would be, it would be law as of June, July 1, 2020 would be the hope.
Yeah.
Yes, and I should clarify that this is not in any bill at the moment. This is something that we would, if you approve this idea, we would be working to try to get it into a bill.
Do we have a legislative who will?
Yes, we do.
Any,
It could.
maybe, yeah. Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, board. McVeigh versus VSBA update.
So for new board members, I'm not sure if we've talked about this since you joined the board. There is, I'll just give you a little update. There is a lawsuit that was filed against the VSBA by an individual school board member last summer, I believe it was. They were seeking a determination that the VSBA is subject to the Public Records Act, and they were wanting to obtain emails. And so VSBA, as you know, is a nonprofit member organization. And so we're the defendant in this lawsuit, and it has progressed to the point where discovery is happening, and that is where the sides can flesh out information that is relevant to the lawsuit. So Neil can just fill you in a little bit. He was deposed yesterday, and I am going to be deposed probably in the beginning of March. And also Nicole Mace, the former executive director of VSBA, will be deposed sometime at the end of February or the beginning of March. After that, the motion for summary judgment that was made by VSBA's attorney, who is representing us and is covered by our insurance, he's going to be renewing the motion for summary judgment that we made earlier. And that is basically asking the court to make a decision based upon all of the known facts, make a legal decision without having to go to trial. So is there anything you wanted to add, Neil, about?
Yesterday, so I was deposed my first time. About 2 hours, and just, answered questions from Chris McVeigh related to board composition, the roles of this board, and the relationship of this board to the work that local school boards do.
Who's representing us?
Bernie Lambeck, but he's an attorney in Montpelier here with Zalager, Cameron, and Lambeck.
And is Christmas McVeigh representing himself? Is he the reason he's deposing is because he's his own representation at court?
Is he attorney?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me.
Yes.
That's all I have unless board members have any other.
He didn't like it very much when the suit was filed. They told him he couldn't have the information to start with. The school board is a member. He showed us the minutes of where they were requesting something, we considered it, but not for an individual board member. Wanted all the emails and whoever the executive director emailed to anybody about anything. Public record, I'm entitled to it. And he wants to know everybody's salary and reimbursement costs and all the stuff that's already out there in the budget that's public record. He was harassing us, basically.
And we're a private organization.
I mean, public records is not applicable to us.
That's the question of our case.
Well, he's a board member and a sort of vocal board member on a board, one of the boards that decided to leave the SBA. There were a lot of unhappy customers there.
Yeah. Okay, 8:09, consent agenda, the January minutes. They were separate, sent out by Terry on Monday, I believe. I will look for a motion, however.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Also name and region, please, when you say.
Salzgitter, Bennington. Sorry.
And seconded by Terry.
Paris, we put Franklin.
All right, any comments, corrections, changes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. If any board members have any items that they would like to see on future agendas, please reach out and let me know. Things are busy in the State House. Keep in touch.
But I really thank you for the proficiency-based learning and all this, keeping us up to date. That was a good educational session.
Thank you.
And
Let us know.
I want to thank, Neil's been getting yanked into a lot lately. Just thank you for
All the
taking
time.
the time to do all that.
that's why you pay me the big bucks. And with that, we'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna move it.
That was by everybody, Terry.
Okay, so it was Clarence and seconded by Lori.
Okay, I was under by significant amounts in the previous two meetings, so I think